The cowboy lost his horse, but the next morning it came back carrying an Apache woman on its back. At first light, when the desert air still held the night's chill and the sky was the pale gray of ash, Luke Tanner stood outside his camp rubbing sleep from his eyes, staring across the empty wash where his horse had vanished the evening before. He had tied the reins to a scrub mesquite, confident as always that Red would be there when he woke. But something had spooked the animal in the night, and by the time Luke heard the distant drumming of hooves, the sound had already faded into the canyon. Now, as the dawn bled over the horizon, he saw the shape of a horse cresting the ridge. His heart kicked once, twice, before settling into a cautious rhythm. Red was coming back. The animal's gait was familiar, steady, but there was something strange about the way it moved, burdened and slow. Luke squinted against the rising light, hand shading his eyes. Then he saw the figure slumped over the saddle, a woman, her long black hair tangled with dust, her bare feet dangling against Red's flank. He stood frozen as the horse drew near. Red came straight to him, nostrils flaring, sides slick with sweat. The woman slid sideways and Luke caught her just before she hit the ground. She was light as a bird, her skin hot beneath his hands. He eased her down onto his bedroll and saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. Her dress, if it could be called that, was torn and bloodstained, her wrists raw where leather thongs had once bound them. Luke looked at the dark-crusted marks, then at the open desert beyond. "Easy now," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Red tossed his head and snorted, as if proud of what he'd done. Luke stroked the animal's neck, whispering thanks, though his mind was already working fast. An Apache woman, out here alone, there were a dozen ways such a thing could mean trouble. Maybe she'd escaped from a raiding party. Maybe she was bait, sent to draw him in. Or maybe, he thought grimly, she'd been taken by white men and somehow got free. Whatever the truth, she was hurt, and she was in his care now. He fetched water from his canteen and dabbed her lips. She stirred slightly, her lashes fluttering open. For a moment her eyes, dark and fierce, met his. Then she whispered something he couldn't catch and slipped back into unconsciousness. Luke worked quietly, tearing a strip from his extra shirt to bandage a shallow wound on her arm. The blood had mostly dried, but the cut looked angry, full of grit. When he'd done what he could, he sat back and studied her face. She was young, maybe 20, and there was strength in the line of her jaw even in sleep. He'd been around Apaches enough to know their reputation, proud, relentless, quick to defend their own. If her people found her here, lying in a white man's camp, they wouldn't stop to ask questions. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, he'd made coffee and cooked a bit of salt pork. The woman hadn't moved. Luke ate in silence, the crackle of the fire the only sound besides the distant caw of a crow. He thought of the trail he was supposed to be on, heading west toward Fort Bowie, where he'd been promised a few weeks of steady pay as a scout. He could still make it if he broke camp soon. But he couldn't leave her here. When she woke again, it was with a start. She tried to sit up, saw him, and froze. Luke raised both hands slowly. "Easy," he said. "You're safe. Ain't gonna hurt you." She blinked at him, breathing fast, her gaze flicking to the rifle leaning against his saddle. Then she spoke, a quick rush of Apache words that Luke couldn't follow. He shook his head. "Don't understand, ma'am. You speak English." She hesitated, then said in halting words, "Where, this?" "About 10 miles east of the Dragoon Mountains. My name's Luke Tanner." He pointed to her arm. "You're hurt. Found you on my horse this morning. Don't know how you got there." Her brow furrowed as if she were trying to remember. "I walk night. Then, nothing." Her eyes closed briefly, and he saw pain flicker across her face. "You were running from somebody?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead she glanced toward the north, where a line of dust hung faintly against the horizon. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "Men come. White men. Take women. Kill." She looked at him then, sharp and searching, as if trying to decide whether he was one of them. Luke felt something twist inside him. He'd seen such raids before, renegade soldiers or drifters who called themselves settlers, doing things the army pretended not to see. "You ain't with them now," he said quietly. "You're safe here." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't move away either. After a moment she said, "My name. Nátse," and pointed to herself. Luke nodded. "Nátse," he repeated carefully. "All right, Nátse. We'll rest a bit. Then I'll get you somewhere safe. He spent the next few hours tending to Red and watching the sky. That dust in the north still troubled him. It could have been anything, wind, a small herd, maybe nothing at all. But he'd learned not to ignore his gut. Around noon he saddled up, lifting Nátse gently into the saddle despite her protests. You can ride? He asked. She nodded weakly. Ride. They headed west, keeping low through dry gullies where mesquite and sage offered cover. The heat grew fierce, pressing down like a heavy hand. Nátse rode behind him, silent except for the occasional hiss of breath when the horse stumbled over rough ground. By late afternoon they reached a small spring hidden in a stand of cottonwoods. Luke called a halt. Nátse slid down stiffly and went straight to the water, drinking deep. He let her be, keeping watch. The desert stretched flat and endless around them, but he thought he saw movement far off, a flicker of light, maybe sunlight on metal. He told himself it was nothing, but his hand drifted to his rifle all the same. When evening came, they made camp. Nátse helped gather wood, moving with quiet efficiency. Luke noticed the way she watched him, cautious but no longer afraid. Over supper he asked, those men, the ones you said took your people. You think they'll follow? She looked into the fire. They take what they want. Leave no trail. Luke nodded slowly. Still, we'll keep moving at first light. Fort's 2 days away if we ride hard. She didn't answer. After a long silence, she said, you go to your fort. I go home. He frowned. Where's home? She pointed east. Chiricahua land. Far. That's Apache country, he said carefully. If I take you there, your people might not take kindly to seeing me. A faint smile touched her lips. Maybe not. But you help me. They see that. Luke stared into the fire. He'd spent years on the edges, too much a drifter to belong anywhere. Maybe this was one more trail that would end in gunfire. But he couldn't leave her. All right, he said finally. We'll head east come morning. That night he couldn't sleep. The desert was too quiet. Around midnight, Red stirred and gave a low snort. Luke rolled over, hand on his Colt. Then he heard it, faint, rhythmic, like distant thunder. Horses. More than one. He was on his feet in an instant. Nátse was already awake, crouched by the fire with her knife in hand. They come, she whispered. Luke doused the fire with a buttful of sand. Get to the rocks, he said, pointing to a small rise nearby. They scrambled up, keeping low. The hoofbeats grew louder, and soon shapes appeared in the moonlight, 4 riders, moving slow, scanning the ground. They carried rifles. Luke watched them pass below, his breath tight in his chest. They were white men, ragged, mean-looking, the kind who lived by taking what others couldn't defend. One of them dismounted and bent over the ashes of their fire. Fresh, he said. They can't be far. Another spat into the dirt. We'll find him by daylight. That Injun's worth good money. Luke's jaw tightened. He felt Nátse's eyes on him. She didn't speak, but he saw the plea there. He made his choice without thinking. When the men moved on, he whispered, we're leaving. Now. They moved east through the dark, keeping to dry creek beds. By dawn they were miles away. Nátse swayed in the saddle, exhausted. Luke called a halt long enough for them to rest and eat a little jerky. Then they pushed on. The land changed slowly as they rode, from flat desert to rolling hills, red and gold under the morning sun. Luke knew they were getting close to Apache country. Every step could bring them into the sights of a war party, but at least that danger was honest. Near midday they stopped at a high ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Below them ran a ribbon of green where a stream cut through the rocks. We'll water the horse and rest a bit, Luke said. As they descended, Nátse stiffened suddenly. Wait, she whispered. She slid off the horse and crouched low, scanning the ground. Then Luke saw it too, a line of hoofprints crossing the sand, fresh and deep. Not the renegades' horses, these were unshod, the marks wide and irregular. Apache? He asked quietly. She nodded. My people. He hesitated. They'll see me as an enemy. She looked at him, eyes steady. You saved me. I tell them. He smiled faintly. Let's hope they listen. They followed the trail down to the stream. Luke drank deeply, splashing cool water on his face. Nátse stood still, listening. Then she lifted her head and called something in her language, a sharp cry that echoed off the rocks. Silence followed. Luke's hand crept to his gun, but she shook her head. Moments later, riders appeared from the far side of the valley, 6 of them, painted and armed with rifles and bows. They approached fast, fanning out to encircle the pair. Luke stayed still, his palms open. One of the riders, older and broad-shouldered, spoke sharply to Nátse. She answered in quick bursts, gesturing toward Luke. The man's gaze shifted to the cowboy. He studied him for a long moment, then dismounted. He said something else, his tone less harsh. Nátse turned to Luke. "He is my uncle," she said. "He believed me." Luke let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The man stepped closer and held out his hand, not to shake, but to touch Luke's chest lightly, a gesture of respect or acknowledgement. Luke nodded in return. The warriors conferred briefly, then motioned for them to follow. Luke looked at Nátse. "Guess that means we're invited." She smiled for the first time, a real smile. "You come. Safe now." They rode through the valley to a hidden camp nestled in a grove of cottonwoods. Dozens of Apache men, women, and children watched them approach. Luke felt every eye on him, felt the weight of old blood and old wrongs hanging in the air. But Nátse spoke quickly to the elders, and something in her words softened their faces. They gave Luke food and water and a shaded place to rest. That night, as the stars came out, he sat beside the fire with Nátse and her uncle. The old man spoke little English, but his meaning was clear enough. They had lost many people to raiders, not soldiers, but white outlaws pretending to be. Nátse had been taken when she tried to fight them off. She had escaped during the night, half dead from exhaustion, and somehow Luke's horse had found her. The uncle said something else, and Nátse translated. "He say, you have brave heart. You can stay if you want." Luke looked into the flames. For the first time in years, he felt the edge of the road lift from his shoulders. "I appreciate it," he said softly, "but I've got a long trail yet." Nátse nodded, though there was a shadow of sadness in her eyes. "You go. But we remember." Before dawn he saddled Red. Nátse stood waiting, her hair braided now, her arm bound neatly where he had cleaned the wound. She handed him a small carved stone shaped like a horse. "For you," she said. "So you find your way." He took it, turning it over in his hand. "Thank you," he said. She smiled faintly. "Your horse is smart. He know what is right." Luke chuckled. "Smarter than me, sometimes." He swung into the saddle. The camp watched in silence as he rode out. At the ridge he turned once, saw Nátse standing alone by the stream, a small figure against the vast desert. He raised his hand in farewell. She lifted hers in return. Then he rode west, the rising sun at his back, the carved stone warm in his pocket. Somewhere behind him, the land was healing itself, slow and stubborn as ever. And though he didn't know what trails lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain, that the world, for all its cruelty, still held room for strange mercies. As he rode on, the wind rose, carrying with it the scent of mesquite and dust, and the faint echo of a woman's voice calling his name across the wide, open land.